You don't get hurt because people lie to you. You get hurt because you trust what sounds right instead of watching what is real. That's the mistake. Quiet, invisible, repeated. And it follows you everywhere, in conversations, in relationships, in late-night thoughts where you replay everything, trying to understand what you missed. You listen to their words. You analyze their tone. You look for meaning in what they said. But the truth was never in what they said. It was always in what they did. And most people never learn to see that. Someone tells you they care, but their effort slowly fades. Someone promises loyalty, but disappears when it becomes inconvenient. Someone reassures you, smiles, agrees, and then acts like none of it mattered. And the most painful part is not the behavior. It's the realization that you didn't see it coming. You thought you understood them. You thought you were paying attention, but you weren't watching the right things. So you blame yourself. You think maybe you missed a sign. Maybe you should have been more intuitive. Maybe you overreacted, or maybe you didn't react enough. And without realizing it, you start doubting your own perception. You become more careful, more analytical, more emotionally involved in trying to figure people out. But that only pulls you deeper into confusion, because the more you rely on words, the further you move away from reality. Here's the truth most people avoid. Words are easy. Words are flexible. Words are designed to protect image, not reveal character. People say what sounds good. They say what keeps options open. They say what maintains control over how they are perceived. But behavior doesn't perform the same way. Behavior leaks. It reveals patterns. It exposes what someone actually prioritizes when there is nothing to gain from pretending. And yet, most people ignore that, not because they are weak, but because believing the words feels better. It keeps hope alive. It delays uncomfortable conclusions. It allows you to see someone as who they could be instead of who they consistently show themselves to be. But that comfort has a cost, because every time you ignore behavior, you disconnect yourself from reality. And reality does not punish you immediately. It waits, it repeats, until one day the pattern becomes too obvious to ignore. And by then, the damage is already done. And most people go through this cycle again and again without ever realizing the real problem was never other people. It was where they chose to look. The real damage isn't that you misunderstand people, it's that every time you ignore what is obvious, you weaken your own sense of self. You teach your mind not to trust what it sees. And over time, that quiet self-betrayal becomes your default way of living. There are two types of people in this world: not strong and weak, not smart and foolish, but reactive and grounded. The reactive person lives through interpretation. They listen, they absorb, they adjust. Someone pulls away, they chase clarity. Someone acts inconsistent, they search for explanation. Someone crosses a boundary, they hesitate to respond because they don't want to misjudge. Their entire inner state is constantly being shaped by external behavior, not because they lack intelligence, but because they lack inner authority. A grounded mind operates differently. It does not rush to interpret, it does not rush to fix, it does not need immediate clarity. It observes patterns, it watches consistency, it allows time to reveal what words try to hide. And most importantly, it does not negotiate with what is repeatedly shown. That is the difference. One lives in reaction, the other lives in alignment. Most people don't realize how much this matters. They think it's just about relationships, just about communication, but it's deeper than that. Every time you ignore inconsistency, you lower your standard. Every time you accept words without evidence, you weaken your self-respect. Every time you over-explain, overthink, or overextend to maintain connection, you give away a piece of your inner stability. And slowly, without noticing, your emotional state stops belonging to you. It becomes something other people can influence, disrupt, or control. Look at how it shows up in real life. Your phone lights up, and your mood shifts instantly depending on who it is. A message is delayed, and your mind starts creating explanations. Someone becomes distant, and instead of stepping back, you lean in harder, trying to restore what was never stable. You tell yourself you are being patient, understanding, mature. But in reality, you are abandoning your own standard in order to keep someone else. This is where most people get exposed, not by others, but by their own need to be chosen, the need to feel important, the need to be seen as valuable. And because that need is so strong, they ignore patterns that contradict it. They downplay behavior. They excuse inconsistency. They reinterpret reality in a way that protects hope, but hope is not perception. Hope is attachment, and attachment distorts clarity. A person within a discipline does not do this. They do not change. They do not interpret every silence as rejection or every inconsistency as something to fix. They have standards, quiet, internal, non-negotiable standards. And those standards shape how they observe, how they respond, and how close they allow others to get. Self-respect is not loud. It does not argue. It does not explain itself endlessly. It simply notices and adjusts. And the moment you begin to live like that, something shifts. You stop trying to understand people through what they say. You start understanding them through what they repeatedly show. You stop asking, what do they mean? And start asking, what do they consistently do? From here, everything becomes clearer. And from here, we go deeper. Most people are not being real. They are performing. That's the first thing you need to understand if you want to stop being confused by people. What you are interacting with most of the time is not someone's true character. It is a version of them that has been adjusted, filtered, and shaped to fit the situation. And the reason this is hard to see is because the performance is not always obvious. It feels natural. It feels consistent. It feels real until it isn't. From a very early age, people learn something subtle but powerful. Acceptance is conditional. Approval must be earned. Belonging requires adaptation, so they begin to adjust. They observe what gets rewarded. They notice what gets rejected. They change their tone, their opinions, their behavior, not all at once, slowly, quietly, repeatedly, until one day, the adjustment no longer feels like an effort. It feels like identity. That's why someone can seem confident in one environment and insecure in another. Why someone can appear kind in public but dismissive in private. Why someone can speak with certainty but act with hesitation when pressure appears. You're not seeing inconsistency by accident. You're seeing different versions of a person depending on what the situation demands. Most people misunderstand this. They think inconsistency means confusion or dishonesty or mixed signals. But the truth is simpler. People are not always being who they are. They are being who works in that moment. And this is exactly why words become unreliable. Because words are part of the performance. Words are chosen carefully. They are shaped to create a certain impression. Someone tells you they value honesty but avoids difficult conversations. Someone says they care but only shows up when it's convenient. Someone promises consistency but disappears when things become uncomfortable. These contradictions don't exist because people are intentionally deceptive. They exist because the version of them speaking is not always the version of them acting. Here's where most people make the mistake. They try to resolve the contradiction through conversation. They ask for clarity. They look for explanations. They want the words to align with the behavior. But that alignment rarely comes from talking. Because the problem is not miscommunication, the problem is misinterpretation. You are listening to the performance and expecting it to match the pattern. It won't. Because behavior does not come from intention, it comes from conditioning. It comes from habit, it comes from what a person defaults to when they are not actively trying to manage how they are perceived. That's why behavior is always more honest over time, not in one moment, not in one interaction, but in patterns, in repetition, inconsistency across different situations. Watch what happens when someone doesn't get what they want. Watch how they act when there is nothing to gain. Watch how they treat people who cannot offer them status, attention, or advantage. These are not dramatic moments, but they are revealing. Because performance becomes harder to maintain when there is no reward for it. A person can say anything once. They can act convincingly for a short period of time, but they cannot fake patterns indefinitely. Eventually, behavior stabilizes. It reveals what is practiced, what is familiar, what is real. And once you understand this, something shifts inside you. You stop trying to decode people through what they say. You stop chasing meaning in conversations. You stop overanalyzing tone, timing, and wording, because you realize none of that matters without consistency behind it. You start watching differently, quietly, without urgency, without needing immediate answers. You let time do the work. You let patterns form. You let behavior speak at its natural volume. And in that space, confusion disappears. Not because people become easier, but because you are no longer looking in the wrong place. Words show you the image. Behavior shows you the truth. Behavior reveals what words try to hide. This is where most people start to feel uncomfortable. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. The gap between what people say and what they consistently do, and that gap is never random. It is the most honest part of human behavior. People speak from intention, but they act from habit. When someone tells you who they are, they're describing the version of themselves they want to believe in. The version that feels right, the version that sounds respectable. But when they act, especially over time, they reveal something deeper. Not what they wish they were, but what they have practiced being. That's why words feel convincing in the moment, but disappointing over time. Think about how often you've heard things like, "I've just been busy. I didn't mean it like that. I'll make it up to you. You matter to me." And maybe once, maybe twice, those explanations make sense. You give the benefit of the doubt. You stay patient. You stay understanding. But then it happens again and again and again. And each time, the explanation sounds slightly different, but the behavior stays exactly the same. This is where most people get trapped, not because they can't see the pattern, but because they don't want to accept what it means. So instead of observing, they explain. They say maybe this person is just going through something, maybe the timing is off, maybe things will change once the situation improves. And slowly, explanation becomes a way to avoid reality, a way to soften what is already clear. But here's the truth. Repeated explanations are not clarity, they are avoidance. If behavior does not change, the reason does not matter. That is the line most people refuse to draw, because drawing that line forces a decision. It forces you to stop waiting, to stop hoping, to stop negotiating with something that has already shown you what it is. And the reason this is so difficult is not logic, it's emotion. People don't struggle to see behavior, they struggle to accept the implications of it. Because once you accept it, you have to let go of something. The version of that person you believed in, the future you imagined, the connection you hoped would stabilize, and letting go of that feels like loss, even when what you are holding on to was never stable to begin with. So instead, because confusion allows delay, confusion allows hope to stay alive just a little longer. But confusion is expensive. It drains your energy. It keeps you emotionally entangled in something that has already revealed its direction. Watch the small things. That's where truth lives. How someone responds when plans change, how they behave when they don't get immediate attention, how they react when something is inconvenient. These are not dramatic moments, but they are honest ones because they are not rehearsed. They are not filtered. They are automatic. A person's habits are more honest than their words because habits are built over time, reinforced without awareness. They reflect priorities, not intentions. If someone values you, you will not need to decode it. Their behavior will move toward you naturally. Not perfectly, not constantly, but consistently enough that you don't feel confused. And if someone does not value you, that absence will also show itself. Quietly, gradually, without announcement. You won't hear it in what they say. You will feel it in what they don't do. This is why clarity does not come from more conversation. It comes from better observation. You don't need more explanations. You need to notice what repeats, because patterns don't lie. People can control what they say. They can adjust how they present themselves. They can explain, justify, and reframe their actions endlessly, but they cannot fake consistency. And once you start watching for that, everything changes. Emotional reactions reveal the truth people try to hide. Not what they say, not what they explain, not even what they believe about themselves, but what comes out when they lose control for a moment. That is where you see who they really are. Because emotion is fast, faster than logic, faster than image management, faster than the version of themselves they are trying to present. And in that speed, truth leaks. Watch what happens when someone is challenged, not attacked, not insulted, just challenged. A simple disagreement, a boundary, a question that doesn't align with their narrative. If they are stable, they stay grounded. If they are not, something shifts immediately. Their tone sharpens, their energy tightens, their response becomes defensive, not because of what you said, but because of what it touched. This is where most people misunderstand emotional reactions. They judge them at the surface. They got angry. They overreacted. They took it personally. But they stop there. They label it. They don't read it. Emotion is not random. Emotion is protection. Every strong reaction is guarding something underneath. Anger often protects a loss of control. Defensiveness protects a fragile self-image. Jealousy protects insecurity. Withdrawal protects fear. These reactions are not accidents, they are signals. But most people ignore them because they focus on the explanation that comes after. I was just stressed. I didn't mean it like that. You misunderstood me. And maybe that's true, but the explanation is not the point. The reaction is, because the reaction happens before the explanation. It is unfiltered, uncontrolled. It reveals what matters to that person at a deeper level. A person who claims to be confident but reacts aggressively to criticism is not confident. They are protecting insecurity. A person who says they don't care but reacts emotionally when ignored is not indifferent. They are attached. A person who insists they are honest but becomes defensive when questioned is not secure in truth. They are protecting a narrative. This is the part most people avoid. Because once you see emotional patterns clearly, you stop believing the identity people present. You start seeing the identity they defend. And identity is not what someone says about themselves. It is what they cannot tolerate being challenged. That is the real shift. When you stop asking, why did they react like that? And start asking, what is this reaction protecting? Everything becomes clearer. Suddenly, anger is not intimidating. It is informative. Defensiveness is not confusing. It is revealing. Silence is not rejection. It is avoidance or control. And most importantly, it stops being personal because you realize something most people never fully understand. People are not reacting to you. They are reacting to what you represent. A boundary might represent loss of control. A question might represent exposure. Your calm might represent something they cannot access in themselves. So they react, not because of you, but because of what is happening inside them. This is where power begins to shift. Because when you don't understand emotional reactions, you absorb them. You mirror them. You get pulled into them. Someone gets angry, you feel pressured. Someone becomes distant, you feel anxious. Someone reacts strongly, you question yourself. But when you understand what reactions actually are, you don't absorb them anymore. You observe them, and that changes everything. You don't escalate when someone gets emotional. You don't chase when someone withdraws. You don't defend yourself unnecessarily when someone becomes defensive. You stay still, you watch, you register the pattern. Not cold, not detached, just clear. Because the strongest person in any interaction is not the one who reacts the fastest. It's the one who understands what the reaction means and chooses not to be controlled by it. Silence and observation are where real power begins. Most people are uncomfortable with silence. They rush to fill it with explanations, with reassurance, with words that make the moment feel less tense. Because silence exposes something they don't want to face: the lack of control, the absence of certainty, the possibility that something is not aligned and no amount of talking can fix it. But silence is not empty. Silence is information. When someone stops talking, when a message goes unanswered, when a moment stretches without resolution, something deeper starts to surface. Not through what is said, but through how a person responds to the absence of words. Some people become restless. They double text. They explain more than necessary. They try to regain control of the interaction. Others withdraw completely. They disappear, hoping distance will remove pressure. And then there are those who remain still, present, unrushed, not because they don't care, but because they don't need to force clarity. This is where you begin to see the difference between emotional dependence and inner stability. A person who needs to fill silence is often trying to manage perception. They are trying to control how they are seen, how they are understood, how the situation unfolds. Silence interrupts that control. It removes the script. And without the script, what remains is raw behavior. Watch what happens when you stop explaining yourself, when you don't rush to clarify, when you don't immediately respond, when you don't soften every moment to keep things comfortable. People start revealing more than they intended. They justify without being asked. They explain things you never questioned. They expose motives they were trying to keep subtle, not because you forced them, but because silence created space and they felt the need to fill it. This is why the calm observer always sees more, not because they are smarter, but because they are not interfering. Most people disrupt their own clarity by reacting too quickly. They speak before they understand. They respond before they observe. They try to resolve tension before they even know what it means. And in doing so, they miss what was being revealed in the first place. Stillness changes that. When you slow down, when you allow moments to unfold without rushing to control them, patterns become visible. You notice hesitation. You notice inconsistency. You notice shifts in tone, energy, and presence that would normally be drowned out by noise. This is not about becoming cold. It's about becoming precise. You don't need to confront everything you see. You don't need to call out every inconsistency. You don't need to explain yourself endlessly to be understood. You observe, you register, you adjust. That's it. Because clarity does not come from forcing truth out of people. It comes from allowing truth to reveal itself. And silence accelerates that process. A person who is comfortable with silence is not empty. They are grounded. They are not dependent on constant interaction to feel stable. They are not pressured by the need to be understood immediately. They can wait, they can watch, they can let reality unfold without interfering. That kind of presence carries weight, not loud, not aggressive, not attention-seeking, but undeniable. You see it in the way they move, the way they respond, the way they don't react when others expect them to. While others are rushing, explaining, defending, proving, they remain steady. And that steadiness shifts the entire dynamic, because when one person is calm, it exposes who is not. When one person is silent, it reveals who cannot handle it. When one person does not chase, it shows who relies on being chased. This is the embodiment of control. Not controlling others, but controlling your own response. You don't need to speak more to gain power. You need to speak less and observe better. Because the moment you stop trying to manage everything is the moment you start seeing everything. How someone treats others is who they are. Not how they treat you when things are easy, not how they act when they want something, not how they behave when they are trying to impress, but how they show up across different situations with different people when there is nothing to gain. That is where character lives. Most people get this wrong because they personalize everything. They think they're different with me. They believe they are the exception, that somehow the way someone behaves with others doesn't apply to them. And for a while, it feels true. You get the attention, the effort, the version of them that feels intentional, focused, almost special. But that version is not stable. It is selective. And selective behavior is not character. It is strategy. Watch how someone treats people who can't offer them anything. The waiter, the colleague they don't need, the friend who is no longer useful, the person who disagrees with them. These interactions are not filtered the same way. There is less performance, less effort to maintain an image. And because of that, they are more honest. If someone is respectful upward but dismissive downward, that is not kindness. That is positioning. If someone is attentive when it benefits them but distant when it doesn't, that is not inconsistency. That is priority. If someone is warm in public but cold in private, that is not complexity. That is control. And the hardest truth to accept is this: the way they treat others is not separate from how they will treat you. It is a preview, not immediately, not in the same form. But eventually, when the dynamic changes, when the novelty fades, when the need to impress disappears, patterns return. Because patterns are not created by circumstance. They are revealed by it. Most people ignore these signals because they are focused on their own experience. They've never done that to me. They wouldn't treat me like that. What we have is different. But that belief is not based on observation. It's based on attachment. You want to believe you are the exception because it protects how you feel. It preserves the version of the connection that feels safe. But reality doesn't operate on exceptions. It operates on patterns. A person who lacks respect will eventually show that lack of respect everywhere. A person who avoids accountability will eventually avoid it with you. A person who disappears when things get difficult will eventually disappear when things become difficult with you. It may not happen immediately, but it will happen consistently. This is why awareness matters. Not to judge people, not to become cynical, but to see clearly. Because when you see clearly, you stop investing in illusions. You stop building expectations on unstable foundations. You stop giving weight to moments that don't reflect the full pattern. You don't need to confront everything you see. You don't need to react to every inconsistency, but you do need to register it quietly, honestly, without distortion. And when you do, something changes in how you move through the world. You stop asking, how do they treat me? And you start asking, how do they treat people consistently? That shift alone removes most of the confusion people live with, because character is not revealed in how someone treats you when you are valuable. It is revealed in how they treat others when there is nothing to gain. The real reason you misjudge people is not them, it's you. Not because you're naive, not because you're unintelligent, but because you're attached. And attachment changes how you see reality. Most people think they are observing clearly. They believe they are reading behavior, noticing patterns, paying attention. But what they are actually doing is filtering reality through what they want to be true. You don't see people as they are. You see them as you hope they are. And that gap is where all confusion begins. You notice the inconsistency, but you downplay it. You see the distance, but you explain it away. You feel something is off, but you tell yourself you're overthinking. Not because the signals aren't clear, but because accepting them would force you to let go of something you don't want to lose. So instead, you adjust reality. You highlight the good moments. You minimize the bad ones. You build a narrative that feels balanced, but is actually biased. This is projection. You assume they think like you. You assume they care the way you would care. You assume their intentions match their words because yours would. But people don't operate from your standards, they operate from theirs. And when those standards are lower than yours, you won't recognize it immediately because you are interpreting their behavior through your own lens. That's why you get surprised. Not because the signs weren't there, but because you weren't reading them objectively. There's another layer to this, and it's harder to admit. Familiar pain feels comfortable. If you've experienced inconsistency before, neglect before, emotional distance before, your mind doesn't reject it, it recognizes it. And recognition feels like connection, even when it's unhealthy. So you stay longer than you should. You tolerate more than you should. You give chances you wouldn't give if you were seeing clearly. Not because you don't know better, but because something about the dynamic feels familiar. And familiarity is powerful. It makes dysfunction feel normal. Then there's the need to be chosen. This one is subtle, but it drives more behavior than most people realize. You want to feel valued. You want to feel important. You want to feel like you matter to someone who seems hard to reach. And because of that, you invest more. You justify more. You hold on longer. Because if you can make it work, it validates you. But that need comes at a cost. It makes you ignore reality. Because reality might say, this person is inconsistent. This person is not aligned. This person does not show up the way you need. And if you accept that, you lose the possibility. So instead, you hold on to potential. But potential is not reality. Potential is imagination. And the more you invest in potential, the less you pay attention to patterns. This is where people get trapped the longest. Not in what is happening, but in what could happen. They wait for change, they wait for clarity, they wait for behavior to align with words. But patterns don't change because you wait. They change when identity changes. And most people don't change their identity just because you hope they will. So you stay in the loop, observing but not accepting, seeing but not acting, understanding but not moving. And that is where your power disappears, not because someone took it, but because you handed it over in exchange for a version of reality that feels better than the truth, But once you see this clearly, something shifts. You stop asking, why are they like this? And you start asking, why did I ignore what was clear? That question changes everything, because it brings the focus back to where it belongs, not on controlling people, not on fixing behavior, but on correcting your perception. And when your perception becomes clear, you don't need answers anymore. In the end, you don't need to control people to protect yourself. You just need to see them clearly. That's the shift most people never make. They try to manage behavior. They try to fix inconsistency. They try to communicate their way into stability. But stability was never something you could create for someone else. It was something you were supposed to recognize and either align with or walk away from. Everything you needed to know was already there, not hidden, not complicated, not waiting to be explained in the way they showed up, in the way they pulled away, in the way they responded when things became inconvenient. You saw it, but you didn't trust it. So you asked for more words, more clarity, more reassurance, as if the answer would suddenly change, as if a better explanation could rewrite a repeated pattern. It doesn't work like that. Reality doesn't argue with you. It repeats itself until you stop ignoring it. And once you understand that, something inside you becomes quieter. You stop chasing certainty through conversation. You stop needing immediate answers. You stop trying to decode every small detail, because you realize nothing is actually unclear. What's unclear is your willingness to accept it. And when that acceptance finally lands, your behavior changes without effort. You don't chase people who are inconsistent. You don't overinvest in people who show limited effort. You don't hold on to potential when patterns are already established. Not because you became cold, but because you became honest. Honest about what you see, honest about what it means, honest about what you are willing to tolerate. This is where self-respect stops being an idea and becomes a standard. Not something you talk about, something you live by, quietly, without needing validation, without needing to prove anything. And from that place, something else happens. You stop taking things personally because you understand that people act according to their level of awareness, their habits, their conditioning, not according to your expectations, not according to what you deserve. They simply reveal who they are through what they repeatedly do. And once you see that clearly, you stop trying to change them. You change your distance, you change your access, you change your energy, you change your presence without drama, without explanation, without noise, because the strongest position you can hold is not reacting, not chasing, not trying to be understood by people who are not observing you clearly. It is standing still in your perception, seeing what is real, and moving accordingly. There are only two ways to live from this point. You can continue to interpret people through what they say and stay confused, emotionally pulled, constantly trying to make sense of inconsistency, or you can shift. You can observe behavior, you can trust patterns, you can detach from explanations that don't change anything, and in doing so, you become something most people are not. Calm, clear, unaffected by what is unstable. Not because nothing affects you, but because you no longer give your perception away. You don't need to figure people out anymore. You just need to watch. And once you truly learn how to watch, people reveal everything.